The confetti may still be falling in New Orleans after the Eagles beat the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. What do the Seahawks need to do in the next few months to close the gap with the Eagles and the rest of the NFC's elite? We're going to be breaking it all down here on our latest Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here on Blue Friday by my co-host, Nick Lee, and a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in, whether you are in nearby Renton, Washington, or if you're overseas in Rome. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The NFL Combine coming up next week, but there's more than just players working out on the field at Lucas Oil Stadium. There's a lot of free agent discussions going on behind the scenes. We're going to be simulating Seattle's offseason with a game of this or that, some scenarios, and we have to pick between two different options. That should be a really fun exercise that we'll be taking part in here on this Blue Friday episode. Without further ado, let's get to it. Now for your lead story here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. It feels like it was only a day or two ago that the Philadelphia Eagles clinched their second Super Bowl title, dethroning the Kansas City Chiefs and stopping them from the first three-peat in NFL history. And the Eagles, at least in my opinion, they played the perfect brand of football. I loved watching this team. Not to say that I'm an Eagles fan, but I love the way that they play. A physical downhill run game, dominant in the trenches on both sides of the ball, well-coached, aggressive. They check off all the boxes. It was one of maybe the most fun team that I had seen in a long time. And it begs the question, looking at the Seattle Seahawks, who just missed the playoffs. They did get 10 wins, but it wasn't good enough to advance to the postseason. We have to wonder, going into this critical offseason for John Schneider and Mike Macdonald, Nick, just what needs to happen for the Seahawks to be able to make the most ground up on Philadelphia and the other elite teams in the NFC. It's going to be difficult to be on par with Philadelphia in just one offseason, but at the same time, a lot of the key additions the Eagles made for that championship team were made this past spring, either in free agency or the draft. Things can change quickly if you make the right moves, and it feels like the Seahawks already have a lot of the core pieces to be able to build a team like that can compete in January.
And well, I know you're not an Eagles fan, and as people who follow me, my dad's from Philly. I was raised in a Philly household, so my dad called me in tears after the 2017 one. We were also, as a family, very excited about those results last couple of weekends ago, obviously. And actually, one of the benefits of me kind of being somewhat invested in the success of the Philadelphia Eagles as a Lee, in my household, is I kind of got to see them build this and really like how they truly built it. And I followed the Eagles closer than any other team besides the Seahawks for me. And we know the blueprint now. The blueprint is there, especially when you're facing a quarterback that clearly, you put Patrick Mahomes in a room with Jalen Hurts. Same thing with Geno Smith versus some of the quarterbacks in the league. That the talent gap might be there when you're facing a team, especially in the playoffs with the Seahawks with Geno Smith, where Jalen Hurts, he doesn't quite have that same pedigree as Patrick Mahomes, but with some pieces around him, with the offense the way it was built, he was able to, in most ways, outduel Patrick Mahomes. And so the defensive line, of course, was the great neutralizer. Not only the defensive line, but just the scheme itself, which I think Mike Macdonald can have. I think he's got that kind of pedigree. The Vic Fangio, who's if he'll never have to buy a drink again in Philadelphia. Vic Fangio is maybe got his own statue in the making. I don't know, but Mike Macdonald can have that kind of game plan, and I think the Seahawks do have the building blocks of a defensive line like that with Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy, and a few pieces here or there through the draft or free agency, retain a few guys. The great equalizer is that D line and the scheme behind it to just rush forward, drop seven, and say good luck, Patrick. So that's a great way to beat a team and do a championship run with maybe not a top 3 quarterback. I don't think Geno Smith is a top 3, top 5 quarterback at this point. But that doesn't mean we saw the Eagles beat Patrick Mahomes with, let's be honest, a lesser quarterback as far as the brand, the brand, the outside opinion, everything. And it's not just the talent, it's the scheme. Kellen Moore did a fantastic job accentuating the abilities of the offensive line in Philadelphia. Certainly would be nice to force trade toggle the entire offensive line from Philadelphia into Seattle, and Saquon Barkley wouldn't hurt. But I think they did a great job. Of course, they had the talent, but just accentuating and maximizing that talent. Like with Geno Smith, he's obviously a fantastic play action passer. I don't think we got a lot of that this year, or at least enough. And with Jalen Hurts in that offense, I think that it tailored really great to his skill set and kind of shielded some limitations. I think Geno Smith would do a lot better if he had an offense more tailored to his skill set.
Yeah, you're going to really lean into the point that I was going to make during this segment. And look, I know that this team is missing some pieces personnel-wise to be able to match up against the Philadelphia Eagles of the world. Next year, maybe Green Bay is in that mix, the top teams in the NFC. But I don't feel like they're that far off. And I think there are a lot of championship caliber pieces on this roster. I think Seattle, especially on defense, the way they played in the second half of the year, I think that this defense has most of the pieces they need to be able to wreak havoc in January. And I think that was one of the things that Mike Macdonald was most disappointed about not making the playoffs. He genuinely believed the defense was playing at the level that they could have won a game or two in the playoffs if they could have just got into the dance. And so I think the defensive pieces, I think adding another pass rusher would certainly help this team. Maybe getting another playmaker that you can put in the secondary, either at corner or safety. But I feel like they've got the pieces for the most part for this to be a defense that can have a ton of success next year and guide this team on a potential playoff run. Where most of the question marks to me, they're on offense. And I'm actually not going to point out personnel first. I'm going to look at the scheme, because you go back and you watch Ryan Grubb's one season as the coordinator. There's a reason he's not in that position anymore. And I'm not taking too many shots at him because I think he's a great college play caller. But the NFL is just a different animal. And there were just way too many times where he was predictable, whether it was knowing he wasn't going to run play action to the weak side of the formation, for example. Like, NFL defensive players are going to pick up things like that in film. Like, they're going to pick it up. And it's so much easier to defend. The lack of spacing for the routes, the unwillingness to try to run the ball for much of the year. 29th in attempts. It felt like the Seahawks failed to accentuate the talent that they have on this football team. And that certainly hindered the offensive line, which already was the weakness of this offense. You made it worse with the scheme not coming together and not maximizing the players that you have until late in the season when they started to run more gap runs. And suddenly the offensive line did okay, at least in the running game. And it took some pressure off the play action or the passing game and off Geno Smith. So I think Clint Kubiak and this offensive scheme might be the biggest game changer if they can get their playmakers in space, they can get their run game going, accentuate Geno Smith's strengths, and your offensive line is just marginally better, then I think you're looking at a team that can win 11, 12, 13 games next season. Obviously, the offensive line has to improve, but to me, a lot of it comes down to the coaching that was on the offensive side of the football.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, what I thought the Eagles did so well was just marry the scheme with the talent. And because I would kind of cringe sometimes, like, oh, Saquon Barkley behind that line, duh. But I'm like, okay, Saquon Barkley is still like a Hall of Fame running back. It just he doesn't. You don't put Trent Richardson back there and he's going to rush for 2,000 yards. Sorry, it's for that stray shot wherever you are, Trent Richardson. But it was the perfect just marriage of all those things together, and you could just sense the cohesiveness between Nick Sirianni and his two coordinators trickling down to the players. There was buy-in. I'm not saying there's not buy-in in Seattle, but just with the focus on getting the most out of the players, the scheme that, let's get, because I agree. I think the Seahawks are certainly closer to the Philadelphia Eagles than they are as to the least talented team in the league. And they have some pieces, especially on defense. And the offensive line, I mean, it's not like the Seahawks, the the Eagles had like offensive or first team all pro on the offensive line. I mean, the Seahawks have some pieces along. Charles Cross could turn into a Super Bowl winning left tackle if he maybe gets some help along the line. So people obviously the low hanging fruit is both lines. I mean, it's a blueprint. Just build Philadelphia's offensive lines. Insert Detroit's offensive line, that kind of thing. That's obviously going to be the easy answer. And it's certainly, as like I mentioned, you're going to play teams with better quarterbacks than Geno Smith. The great neutralizer is maximizing your talent on defense and having the solid scheme to really complement your entire football team.
Yeah, I think that we can agree, obviously, personnel-wise, offensive line is going to come first and foremost, but if you can get some more reinforcements for your pass rush, if you can add more depth for your secondary, get another wideout or another tight end, maybe one of both for Geno Smith that's going to fit better with this system that's going to run more two tight end and two tailback or two back sets, get a fullback. I'm so excited about that. Those pieces and then marrying your talent to the scheme on offense. I think Mike Macdonald was able to do that in the second half with his defense. So they're going to be able to hit the ground running on that front. Offensively, they're starting over again. You got to find a way to marry Clint Kubiak's scheme to the players they've got. To me, that's just as big as the personnel changes that may or may not happen here in coming weeks. When we come back, speaking of those personnel changes, the free agent period is going to kick off in less than a month. The heat of the offseason is here. We are going to be simulating Seattle's offseason with a spirited game of this or that. We'll go to the offensive side of the football first, coming up next year on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on an overtime comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting from start to finish, whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player like Steph Curry to hit a clutch three as he's done so many times in the past. I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. He's Nick Lee. A special thanks to all the 12s tuning in. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. With free agency less than a month away and the combine coming up in just 72 hours, we are in the heat of the NFL offseason. So it's time for a spirited game of this or that. And the rules are simple, Nick. I'm going to give two different scenarios for the Seahawks this offseason. You have to pick one or the other and state your case for the selection. There will be some that are easier than others. There will be some of these that are going to be really tricky. We are going to start on the offensive side of the football. And of course, we've got to have the one that maybe is going to create the most contention amongst our listeners here at the quarterback position with our first one. This or that, Nick. Extend Geno Smith or draft Jackson Dart in the first 2 rounds.
I'm resisting the urge to cheat and say both, because you could do both. I mean, really.
But theory. You can't. I'm not letting you.
I know. If I'm picking one, draft Jackson Dart. If you've been following some of the stuff I've been saying about Geno Smith on online, I have never, ever been a Geno hater. I don't have a pitchfork in the closet or anything like that. I think he's done some fantastic things with the Seahawks. I still think you can win a lot of football games with Geno Smith under center. I do think that there's a bit of a fork in the road with paying him versus, getting the roster better around him, and where does that value, threshold. And with Jackson Dart, obviously, I think you at least need to take a swing at a quarterback. And the more I'm hearing it, the more I'm thinking if the Seahawks don't pick at 18, if they don't take Jackson Dart at 18, they might not have a chance to do it again. Even maybe they trade back and maybe he's in the 20s. But the more I listen to people talk about Jackson Dart, He might not even be around at 18. I mean, who knows? I've seen a few mocks that have him in the top 15. So I like the skill set there. This is really the first year I've dove into like making my own draft grades, just like really nerding out. And just from my own kind of formula I've developed, Jackson Dart's right up there. He's the tier between Sanders and Ward versus Dart for me is not that big. And he's minimum 400 dropbacks. He led all FBS in yards per attempt, big time throw rates. He's 7th in adjusted completion percentage, first in passer rating, been on 2 different systems, 2 different teams on 2 different coasts, basically. I like the kid. I just like his moxie. He's got a little bit of an edge. Utah guy, so get him out back west again would be cool. I think that would be just a really fun adventure. It might be an adventure. I've seen this phrase, the Ole Miss or Lane Kiffin tax that certain quarterbacks have coming out of the league under his tutelage. But Jackson Dart just has all the tools you would want, makes all the throws. I think that's worth taking a swing on.
Yeah, I'm with you that I wish I could say both, but that's not the exercise here. And I don't know that Jackson Dart's going to be there at 10, let alone 18. I could see a scenario that 3 quarterbacks go in the top 10 picks because it's the quarterback position. That's just the way that it goes, even with a class that is not viewed near as highly as the one that we just saw last year and even the season before that. I'm going with extend Geno Smith, though, because I think you have to look at the next couple of years. And I can see Jackson Dart being a really good starter in the NFL. I'm not sold on him being ready to start on day one, though. I think he's going to need some time to learn pro offense and be able to view that on the sideline. And to me, Geno Smith is the best option for the Seahawks for at least the next couple of seasons. You got to get that cap hit lowered. You could open up to $23 million by extending him, and it gives you the flexibility to build around him, make it a front-loaded deal in terms of guarantees, and that's typically how the Seahawks have done business anyway. I think you got to do that, and you get your quarterback in this draft potentially to develop behind him. But in this case, I got to go with making sure that my starter right now is under center and is happy for the next couple of seasons. This or that, this one is going to create some interesting reactions. Trade DK Metcalf or cut Tyler Lockett?
Oh, man. I mean, either way, you're the bad guy. So I'm going to go with, unfortunately, cut Tyler Lockett. And this doesn't mean I want to, kick him to the curb and, have him sitting on the curb there and a car drives by in a puddle and gets him all wet. Disrespectful. Nothing like that. I truly hope that if there is a situation where they release Tyler Lockett, it's very respectful and dignified, and there's some sort of, I know it's going to be tough, and he'll probably be, kind of bummed about it, and I'm sure fans will too, but that cap hit, you just can't do it. You can't come back with your number 3 receiver basically at this point with a $30 million cap hit. That's just not happening. And so, sure, maybe cut him and bring him back on a, I don't know, say minimum deal, but if there's some hometown discount to be had, sure. He's a franchise icon, borderline Ring of Honor kind of player. And so I would hope that I'm saying cut Tyler Lockett, but please do not misinterpret that as disrespect. But I'm kind of in the mindset of I want to see guys for what they can be in 2025 and beyond. And I'm not quite sure that's there for Tyler Lockett at the high level he used to.
DK Metcalf is 5 years younger. That's the first reason that I'm going with cut Tyler Lockett. And the second, again, it's that cap hit. I can handle a $30 million cap hit for DK Metcalf because he is in the prime of his career. He is coming off a season that wasn't his best, but he still almost got to 1,000 yards. And he was playing injured most of the second half. You have to consider that. And I also think that Ryan Grubb did not do him any favors. It seemed like he really struggled to find ways to scheme him open, which should not be an issue with a guy of that athletic talent. Like, there shouldn't be an issue like that. I think DK Metcalf is still one of the building blocks for this team. And I think Mike Macdonald wants him to be one of the building blocks. He has that tenacity as a blocker. You can look at some of the things he's done post whistle. That nastiness has bled further than it needs to sometimes, but you want players like that. There's a balancing act there. And I don't think there's any disrespect here for Tyler Lockett. I believe behind the scenes that they're going to try to see if there's a way that they can move some of this salary cap hit down the line and keep him on the roster. I don't know that it's going to be doable, though. And of these two, to me, it's pretty obvious. The player that's 5 years older, that's had 2 straight seasons with diminishing production, is not the player he was a couple years ago. I think he's still solid, but number 3 receiver, you're not going to absorb anywhere close to that type of a cap hit. So to me, this one's a pretty easy one. This or that, pick up Charles Cross's 5th-year option or draft a tackle in the first round. Oh, this one's actually one I might have kind of a difficult time with.
Man, okay. When we were talking about this situation, this is the one I think I had the hardest time with, just because, again, you could do both. And I was thinking along the lines of drafting a tackle perhaps to mold us into a guard. But if we're strictly talking either picking up his 5th option or drafting his replacement, I would pick up his 5th option. And because with that, he had signs of being a top 10, top 12 left tackle. And in some ways he was up there as the top 10 left tackle in the league, depending on what grades you're looking at. And he had a really hot start. I was even throwing out all pro after a few weeks with what he had such a hot start. But of course, some of that was a little bit on the softer side of the schedule for NFL standards, at least, that the Seahawks face. So I'm going to go with pick up Charles Cross's option, just because it's one of those things where I don't want to do the whole I didn't know how good we had it until he was gone thing with Charles Cross. So especially with kind of how the Seahawks have been a little bit in an offensive line purgatory, he's kind of the one solid thing that you kind of know what you're getting now. And maybe even the ceiling isn't there yet. And maybe he can be that Pro Bowl left tackle. So of those two, if we're strictly talking drafting his replacement or picking up the 5th option, I think you pick the 5th option, keep Cross there.
Well, it doesn't say that it has to be his replacement.
I know. I kind of changed the rules.
It could be a tackle move to guard. So
right.
I'm going with the draft a tackle in the first round, and then I kick him inside. Maybe it's somebody like Armand Membo from Missouri, who I'm a big fan of, really athletic, that I think could play tackle or guard at the next level. I'm picking that one because this is my viewpoint. I think John Schneider is going to be trying to work out a long-term extension. I think he's going to try to avoid that 5th-year option because that'll be pricey with a tackle.
True.
And if you have to do it because negotiations aren't going where you want them to go, then yeah, you pull that lever down if you absolutely have to. But he's been very anti-5th-year option. And in this case, I would get it because of the price tag. I'm finding a way to get him extended right now because I do still view him as a building block. He's 24. He's still a puppy in this league. I think he's got to be one of your building blocks on offense, but that 5th-year option is cost prohibitive in my opinion. I think you find a way to get him extended, and then I'm drafting another guy that maybe could be Abe Lucas's replacement at right tackle too a year from now. We don't know what's going to happen on that front. So that's where I stand on that particular one. All right, this one, our fans are going to be like, this one's obvious, but it's not so much. This or that. Sign Trey Smith or re-sign Laken Tomlinson. Basically, we are looking at the two extremes. The Sith would love this.
Oh, man. This is going to go against everything I've been preaching all offseason, but I'm going to go re-sign Laken Tomlinson just because I have my eggs in a different basket. And I'm not saying I'm going to give him, 1,000 snaps at right guard or at left guard, I guess. But it's mostly a shifting of some chess pieces and keeping, and for me, this would be a move of depth. And if Laken Tomlinson's your backup guard, that's a pretty good offensive line, I think. If he's getting 1,000 snaps, I think we've seen that. There's some ups and downs, sure. Allowed 6 sacks this year, 38 pressures, not great mostly. I think he especially struggled in some parts of the run game. But in the spirit of, obviously, Trey Smith is going to break the bank. I mean, he's going to be one of the top paid guards maybe ever. I'm going to move my eggs around in a different basket, get Laken Tomlinson as a depth piece.
I'm going with the expensive toy. And look, I know this is a fantasy world with John Schneider, but I do know that Joe Thuney a few years back, the Seahawks gave an offer for $16 million for him. And ultimately he picked the Chiefs with a little more money. They kind of bowed out at that point. Trey Smith is going to be a little younger than what Thuney was coming into his free agent period. He has been a top 10 guard pretty much since he came into the league as a 6th round pick. The guy had first-round talent, blood clots, reason he fell down. He has been fantastic in the NFL, and he is one of the best zone blockers in the entire league. Clint Kubiak would be drooling. I don't care if he's $21 million a year. Why are we opening up all this cap space cutting Tyler Lockett? You reallocate that money from wide receiver to offensive line, put your money where your mouth is. And John Schneider was talking about it on Seattle Sports, saying, guards are overpaid and they're overdrafted. Part of the reason is because of supply and demand. And as a former econ teacher, at some point, you got to say the supply stinks. I'm going to give in to demand, and I'm going to go pay for a guard. So I'm going to pay Trey Smith here. Real quick, our last one, this or that. And this was kind of an intriguing one, too. Keep Noah Fant with 1 year left in his contract, or sign Kevin Zeitler, another guard that has a history with some of Seattle's coaches.
Kevin Zeitler was the basket I had my eggs in. And sure, he's not as young as Trey Smith, but just he feels the biggest need, instantly legitimizes that offensive line. He's not going to completely break the bank like a Trey Smith would at his age. Yeah, 2 years of experience with Mike Macdonald. They didn't have lunch together probably, but they were on the same sideline wearing the same Ravens logo. Pro Bowl year, his last year in Baltimore, then of course helped dominate with the Detroit Lions last year. He's an adult in the room, and I think the Seahawks could sure use, at least especially on the offensive line, a few more adults in the room. And he would, maybe 10, 11 million. I don't know if that might be too rich, but yeah, that is the basket I'm putting my eggs in the name of re-signing Laken Tomlinson as a backup. Give me Kevin Zeitler.
I might have my gravestone someday say died on Noah Fant Hill, because I just always listen. Clint Kubiak, if there's finally going to be a coach that's going to maximize Noah Fant, it's Clint Kubiak. He's had great success with tight ends. Juwan Johnson, who I do not think is the talent that Noah Fant is, had 500-plus receiving yards last year. He had a 7-touchdown season a couple years ago. That was before Kubiak came in, but he had really good numbers in Kubiak's system in Minnesota. They had Conklin with over 500 receiving yards, and he's not known for his receiving prowess at the tight end position. So, I'm going to keep buying it one more time. Let's find a way to see if we can maximize Noah Fant in this offense. I'm going to stay on that hill, whether it's bad or good. I'm going to stay on that hill. All right, we're going to switch gears now, continuing this or that on the defensive side of the football. When we return, we've got 5 more scenarios and maybe some more contentious ones in terms of trying to make roster decisions this offseason. Don't go away. You're listening to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Welcome back to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, on Blue Friday by my co-host, Nick Lee. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Continuing to simulate Seattle's upcoming offseason with some hypotheticals here, playing a spirited game of this or that. I give you 2 scenarios. You have to pick one. You can't do both. You have to pick one or the other. You also can't say neither. You have to pick one. So here we go on the defensive side, Nick. This or that. Restructure Uchenna Nwosu's contract or cut Draymond Jones.
I'm going to go with restructure Nwosu. I'd like to keep Nwosu on the Seahawks. The 2024 Walter Payton nominee for the Seahawks. Obviously a great person. Talk about adults in the room. I think Uchenna Nwosu certainly fits in that category. And I'm still kind of riding that high from how good he looked when he first came to Seattle. And you'd like to see him rekindle that. Last year might have been something of a lost year, trying to get back from injuries. And he just can bit by the injury bug. If I could wish, for one Seahawk to have a truly healthy, normal offseason and hit the ground running with some full steam. I mean, him and Abe Lucas would be pretty close in that race for me. I'm still a big Uchenna Nwosu fan. Wiggle. I think it's $6 million that you can wiggle loose with the restructure. I keep him on the team. Find a way to do that because especially with the Seahawks are probably gonna make a move to add a younger edge rusher somewhere. Having a guy like Nwosu in the room certainly would help.
Smart teams know when to cut their losses on a deal that didn't work out. And Draymond Jones has not worked out, at least to the level that he was paid to. There have been flashes. The Falcons game last year, that looked like the player I think the Seahawks envisioned that they were signing. But then he had 2 or 3 games that he just kind of disappeared again. There has not been consistency. And I know he gives the versatility up front that Mike Macdonald wants, but he's got a huge cap hit. You can save $11.5 million by cutting him. I think that this is one of the most likely things to happen in the next couple of weeks. I anticipate Draymond Jones is gone. They're not going to save as much money with the Uchenna Nwosu restructuring or cutting him. I think they want to keep Nwosu because he's been very productive when he's been healthy. You can't say that about Draymond Jones. So this is a pretty easy decision for me. Next one, this or that. Extend Riq Woolen or tender restricted free agent Josh Jobe.
This was a good one. I'm going to go with extend Woolen. I mentioned this earlier in the offseason where I'm not ready to give up on Riq Woolen. It's really hard for me to give up on 99th percentile size, 99th percentile length, 99th percentile speed. It's really hard for me to give up on that. Might not be 99th percentile and between the ear stuff sometimes. But just the physical with tools. He actually had some in some games last year. And obviously, we're grading him on that standard he really set for himself as a rookie with that Pro Bowl, breakout kind of year, and maybe some sophomore slump, some film on him, kind of got exposed a little bit. And even if he just becomes, something of a second fiddle to Devin Witherspoon, but still a solid corner, I don't see anything wrong with that. I think it might be a little unfair to expect perennial Pro Bowler at this point, but just with how physically gifted he is, and sure, what he showed you as a rookie, I would hate to leave. What I really don't want is to let that walk out the door. And Philly or Detroit get that, and he becomes an all-pro with that kind of with those kind of physical traits.
Yeah, I've got to go extend Woolen too, just because I think that those tools, they don't grow on trees. Like I can't remember a corner that had the size, speed, length combo, and the playmaking skills, the ball skills that this kid has. And I know there's been more inconsistency the last few years, but it feels like going into the final year of his rookie deal, Mike Macdonald was starting to reach him more late in the season. I want to see another full year with these two. I think you get that extension done now, though, because I trust the potential there, the upside. That's somebody I'm willing to roll the dice on and put some money forward and try to keep him on my football team. And that's not to say I don't want Josh Jobe. This would be one I'd like to do both, but I think extending a generational athlete, which is what Riq Woolen is, I think it makes a ton of sense to do that. Jobe, even if you don't tender him, maybe there's a way you can bring him back even cheaper than that. The extension with Woolen, though, has got to be something to me that's got to be on the front page as far as things you want to do for the future of your football team. This or that, re-sign Jarran Reed or draft a defensive tackle in the first 2 rounds.
Oh, man, this was really tough for me because I think Jarran Reed has had a really cool career with the Seahawks. Seems like he really loves playing here. I forgive this really off reference, but it reminds me of like Jurickson Profar with the Padres, where he just absolutely was terrible everywhere else, but for some reason he played really well with the Padres and seems to he just sticks there. Unfortunately, he's not there anymore. But anyway, like those kind of players exist where they elevate their game with a certain team, a certain city, a certain coach. So I hate to say goodbye to that, but my answer is draft a defensive tackle because just the class itself, we hear over and over again, the deepest positions in this draft class are running back and defensive tackle. Defensive tackle, there are some monsters that you can get day 2, even day 3. Guys I'm looking at as far as you mentioned specifically the first 2 rounds, TJ Sanders out of South Carolina, Omar Norman Lott out of Tennessee. Looks like a lot of fun. Just huge, kind of like a Jordan Davis type, maybe out of Georgia, maybe not quite as slender, but just massive and just muscle and the perfect combination of muscle and fat, I guess. He's a lot of fun there. So, and so I'm going to go draft a defensive tackle just because, this class is pretty deep and I'd like to dip into that.
Yeah, this one was really tough for me just because, again, I'd like to do both of these things because I like the way that Daniel Jeremiah, the draft expert, said it the other day. Be greedy on the defensive line. There's no such thing as too much on the defensive line. Keep drafting them. But this is a really good defensive line class. And as much as I love Jaron Reed and I think that he needs to be back, the idea of getting another young DT, one that could be a nose tackle, there's some really good nose tackles that also can play 3-tech position in this class. You can get a really good player in the second round on day 2. I'm going to go with that one as well, even though I think Jaron Reed should be back, and I think he's an important part of this locker room that would be missed just as much off the field as on the field if you didn't re-sign him. This or that, I think this one actually is kind of an intriguing one. Cut Rayshawn Jenkins or extend Kobe Bryant. This is not keep Kobe Bryant. This is give him an extension or cut Rayshawn Jenkins.
I'm going to go extend Kobe Bryant just because I at this point he wouldn't be this extension where it's some like lifelong bank breaking kind of extension. I think you saw enough there towards the end. I mean, really kind of came into his own at that safety spot, kind of just after a couple of years of toiling and kind of bouncing around. It was really cool to see him blossom in what he became this year. And yeah, he would, I think he would come fairly cheap as far as an extension goes. And Rayshawn Jenkins, unfortunately, it's not like he was bad. He just wrong place, wrong time, I guess, for an injury because it kind of led the way. But I'm going to go with extend Kobe Bryant just because he's still young and he seemed like he just kind of finally found his footing, and maybe the ceiling is higher than we think.
Yeah, look, this one was tough for me because I envision a scenario where Rayshawn Jenkins is cut because it's $5+ million that you can save against the cap. And I don't think he's a starter next year. I think Kobe Bryant has that job. And for that reason, if you're already convinced Kobe Bryant's your starter, he's the younger player, significantly younger, probably has a little bit more positional versatility than what Rayshawn Jenkins is going to provide, especially at this point in his career. To me, you extend to the young player that Mike Macdonald has raved about since he got here. I mean, even when he wasn't, it looked like he maybe wasn't going to make this team in some people's eyes in August. Mike Macdonald was raving about his practice habits. So I think Mike Macdonald would be upset if Kobe Bryant is not back for another contract. Last one, this or that, re-sign linebacker. Man, this is bad. I'm going to have to edit this out. Why am I, what is going on here? Ernest. Why could I not remember his name? So our final one here, this or that, re-sign Ernest Jones or extend Boye Mafe. This might seem like one that's a pretty cut and dry selection, but I think this is two really important steps for the Seattle Seahawks.
Well, I think there's two players that are younger that seem to be finally coming into their own. Obviously, I think Boye Mafe plays a bit more of a premium position if you have to pick between the two. But the way the defense played when Ernest Jones came to town, I mean, it's just undeniable. I did some breakdowns before the trade this year. The Seahawks were averaging 23.4 points per game allowed, 146 rushing yards per game allowed. After Jones came to town, that dropped down a field goal, 20.3 points per game, and 103 rushing yards. So that dropped 40 rushing yards a game. The Seahawks allowed 40 less rushing yards a game with Ernest Jones playing linebacker. I would say that's fairly valuable given all this discussion about how the running game is back and how that can build a championship game or championship team. How about stopping the run? Ernest Jones seemed to really galvanize that defense in doing that. So let's get him back in the fold.
Yeah, this one's easy for me, even though I think Boye Mafe would make a lot of sense to give a second contract to, because I see a player that's still ascending and I think still has double-digit sack potential to be a consistent double-digit sack caliber player. But Ernest Jones was the game changer. And linebacker, you watch the Ravens under Mike Macdonald in this last year, Mike Macdonald's scheme. Middle linebacker is critical to his scheme. You've got to have talent there. And I know Tyrese Knight played well last year, but just rolling with him next year, you got to have Ernest Jones there to complement him and really not just complement him, be the feature piece in the middle there. So to me, this is a no-brainer. You got to get Ernest Jones done. That is priority number one this entire offseason. Get number 13 locked up long-term and make it happen. As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Nick at Nick Lee 51. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we return on Monday, going to be live from Indianapolis because we got the Combine coming up. Going to continue previewing everything that we're expecting to go down and all the players we're going to be watching in Indy. Make sure you don't miss it. And thanks for listening and enjoy your weekend. Go Hawks.